Welcome to the podcast Human Relationships, Anthropon Scheseis. Hello and welcome. I'm Ioannis Anthropoulos and this is Anthropon Scheseis, Human Relationships. Here we explore the psychology of relationships, the pressures of modern life, and how we can connect in a more meaningful way with ourselves and with other people, with poetry as our starting point. Hello and welcome to Human Relationships, the podcast that delves into human connections, love, and the psychology of living together. Today, we touch on a topic that concerns many people: distance in relationships. What happens when physical distance separates two people? Is it always negative, or can it also function as a tool for growth? How does our brain process it, and how can we manage it well? And, ultimately, is it physical distance that affects relationships, or emotional distance, which can be created even when we live with someone? If you have ever felt that someone you love is far away, either because they are in another city, another country, or because you simply feel them drifting away emotionally, this episode is for you. What does distance mean in relationships? Distance, a word that can bring to mind images of separation, loneliness, longing. But distance in relationships is not always something physical. There are two kinds of distance. First, physical distance, when circumstances keep two people apart. Long-distance relationships, work obligations, migration, etc. And second, emotional distance, when two people may be in the same space but feel alienated from each other. According to the Harvard study of adult development, the most important source of happiness is neither career nor money, but the quality of the relationships we maintain. And this quality is judged not only by physical presence, but also by how emotionally connected we feel. This study has consistently concluded that close relationships are a key predictor of well-being and health over the lifespan. Also, in 2021, a Harvard study showed that approximately 60% of long-distance relationships manage to survive if there is communication and emotional closeness. So the question is, when is distance simply an obstacle, and when does it become an opportunity for something deeper? Let's now move on to the scientific approach. How does distance affect the brain? Neurobiology of distance. A hug, touch, and the physical presence of a loved one increase levels of oxytocin, the hormone of closeness and safety. But when there is distance, the brain perceives absence as stress, increasing the production of cortisol, the stress hormone. This can create insecurity, doubt, and fear of abandonment. Psychological impact. Distance can strengthen the ideal of the relationship, but it can also trigger insecurity. A study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships showed that couples who live in different cities display higher levels of emotional connection through meaningful communication. Distance pushes them to talk more about their thoughts and feelings. This shows that distance is not necessarily destructive. It can become an opportunity for deeper connection. Also, there is another research from 2013 from Jiang and Hancock, which they found that long-distance partners often engage in more intimate disclosure and idealization processes across media to maintain closeness. Let's have a thorough look on distance and different types of relationships. First, we have romantic relationships, one of the most difficult kinds of distance because it touches our need for physical contact. Even so, long-distance relationships can be stronger when there is trust, communication, and a shared vision for the future. Research in the Journal of Communication showed that long-distance couples tend to speak more honesty about their feelings, which improves connection. Of course, there's differences on how distance differs for married couples, for new couples, and for relationships that begin online. Second, family and friendships. Distance due to studies, work, or migration can make it harder to stay connected with parents or friends. Even so, modern technology like video calls, social media can keep the relationship alive. The COVID-19 pandemic increased online contact, but it also intensified loneliness. Of course, technology played a role in bridging the gap, as we talked in episode 1. Number 3, emotional distance. Perhaps the most difficult form of distance, when two people are together but do not communicate in a meaningful way. It often happens in marriages or long-term relationships. So, what's happening when there is social isolation, and which are the effects on mental health? Distance in relationships, when prolonged or not managed well, can lead to social isolation, which has serious effects on mental health. According to the American Psychological Association, APA, social isolation is associated with an increased risk of anxiety, depression, and even physical problems such as cardiovascular disease. A 2020 study published in Health Psychology found that people who experience chronic social isolation show 30% increased risk of heart disease, 26 higher likelihood for premature death, and increased levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, which affects memory and concentration, among other things. Especially after the pandemic, loneliness has been described as a silent pandemic. The APA emphasizes that social isolation is as dangerous to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, why does this happen? When people are socially isolated, the brain perceives the lack of contact as danger, activating mechanisms of anxiety and insecurity. Emotional relationships are biologically necessary for stress regulations. Lack of contact and communication reduces oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and increases the feeling of loneliness. And how does our brain process it? When we experience distance or social isolation, the brain processes it as stress because we have evolved to depend on social relationships for survival. Our brain activates regions associated with pain, making us feel real physical discomfort due to emotional withdrawal. In this way, the social anxiety that results from distance or isolation has direct effects on our physical well-being. Neurologically, when distance is emotional or physical, regions of the brain associated with distress or anxiety are activated, such as the anterior cingulate cortex, which processes not only physical pain but also the social pain of withdrawal. This explains why distance can cause real emotional and physical discomfort. But how can we manage this situation? Our brain can regulate this discomfort in various ways. Let's have a thorough look. First, self-regulation through communication. Daily check-ins and messages can reduce the feeling of social pain. In particular, communication via video calls or voice notes can provide a sense of closeness even at distance. Second, using mental closeness. Research shows that representing the loved person in our mind, mental imagery, can reduce emotional distance, activating brain regions associated with connection and oxytocin. Third, creating new social connections. If the brain experiences distance as a threat, joining new social groups or communities can provide a way to balance the social gap and loneliness. And fourth, trust and positive thinking. Strengthening faith in the relationship, maintaining trust, and reducing negative thoughts about abandonment can reverse the negative impact of distance on our mental state. So, summarizing it, our brain, while it processes distance as something painful, can be trained to manage it properly through strategies that strengthen the sense of connection and reduce isolation. Social connection is vital for our mental and physical health, and fortunately, there are ways to enhance it even at a distance. So, how can we mitigate the effects of isolation? 1. Maintaining quality communication. Even if there is physical distance, steady communication through video calls, voice notes, and letters, or messages of course, helps maintaining emotional closeness. 2. An active social life. Small social interactions, for example joining groups or online communities, reduce loneliness. And 3, strengthening self-care. Physical activity, creative expression, for example writing, music, dance, painting, or whatever expresses yourself or you like. And of course psychotherapy can function as antidotes to loneliness. So distance is not only a matter of physical presence but also of emotional closeness. If you feel that you are becoming isolated, do not ignore the signs, please. I'm repeating that. Do not ignore the signs. Do not stay isolated. Social connection is vital for our mental and physical health, and no one deserves to be isolated and lonely. Let's move on to some practical tips to manage distance. First, daily contact, but not excessive attachment. Second, creating shared experiences from afar, for example online movie nights, shared projects, cooking together, especially if there's time difference, finding like an hour that works for both of you. Third, open communication and clear expectations. Be very careful on that. For example, how you see the future of the relationship. Do not stay in the dark. Be very clear and very honest. And fourth, of course, trust. Avoiding control and jealousy, avoiding toxic behavior, and keep the trust between the two of you. Creating stable communication pattern, maintaining shared experiences, trust and managing insecurity. And of course, emotional independence and self-care. Distance does not mean loneliness, but growth for both people. And keep that in mind. Everything starts and ends with us. There is self-care should not be abandoned because of loneliness. And now we're moving on to the poetry section. I've already mentioned to you many times that poetry is a source of inspiration for this podcast and for everything we share here together. In my poetry collection, Anthropon Scheseis, Human Relationships, there is an entire chapter titled Distance. It's a theme that inspired me deeply and affected me many times, because in one way or another, all of us have experienced distance in our lives, or we will experience distance in our lives or relationships. So today I've chosen to read you a poem from that chapter. The poem is called, in Greek, Anasamu, which actually means my breath, but can have both meanings as my breath, my own breath, and you are my breath. And I'll be reading it in my own English translation from the original Greek. You are my breath. And it is this distance that separates us, like an endless road in the dark. And time, the time that differs, making the distance feel like a galaxy. And that galaxy, within its own darkness, vast and without an end. Only my mind brings you close as I wish I had you, so close that my breath could become your breath, and my body could take your own shape, as an inseparable part, like the mirror you look into. This is one of my favorite poems. Of course, you are listening to it translated in English, and this sometimes loses some of the words and some of the meaning and some of the connection of the words. But this doesn't take away that in its lived and descriptive way, it shows some of the effects distance can have on our lives, on our relationships, on ourselves, on our psychology, and on our emotions, that sometimes feel hard and dark as a vast galaxy. Before we close this episode, I want to leave you with some questions as always. Have you experienced distance in a relationship? How did you deal with it? Do you believe emotional distance is more dangerous than physical distance? And does technology truly bring people closer? Or is it an illusion of connection? Distance is a difficult part. And summarizing today's episodes, distance is not necessarily fatal for a relationship. It can strengthen emotional connection if managed well. And communication and trust are the pillars that keep relationships alive from afar. Distance can be a teacher. It teaches us what truly matters, what endures over time, and how to love more consciously. And before we close, I want to leave you with something simple but important. Connection is not a luxury. It is not something we earn only when we are good enough, or when life finally becomes easier. Connection is a human need, and when it is missing, we don't just feel sad. We feel unsettled, restless, and sometimes even physically unwell, because Our nervous system is built to co-regulate. It is built to find safety in presence, in consistency, in being seen. If you are listening to this and you feel lonely, I want you to know something clearly. Loneliness does not mean you are broken. It does not mean you are unloved. It does not mean you have failed. It means you're human, and your system is asking for closeness, for meaning, for space where you don't have to carry everything alone. And if you are in relationships, romantic or not, I invite you to check in with one small question. Am I showing up with presence, or am I only showing up with performance? Because sometimes we are around people, but we are not truly there. We are distracted, overwhelmed, exhausted, or afraid to be real. And that is how loneliness can exist even inside a relationship. If you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. Connection is built in small repeated moments. A message that is not rushed, a conversation without multitasking, a question that is sincere, an honest "I miss you", a simple "Are you okay?", a moment of attention that says you matter. And maybe, just maybe, the most radical thing we can do in modern life is to be emotionally present. Not perfectly, not constantly, but intentionally. Thank you for listening to Human Relationships. If this episode resonated, follow the podcast so you don't miss the next one. And if you want to share your thoughts or your story, you can find me on Instagram, which can be found at the episode description, or leave your message in the podcast comments. Until the next time, take care of your relationships and take care of the relationship you have with yourself. And sometimes when distance feels like a galaxy, the first bridge is simple. A message, a voice, a moment that turns silence into contact.